In the chaotic neon-drenched underworld of old Hong Kong, power was seized with fists and held through fear. This is the story of one of its most ferocious figures, a man who clawed his way from the lawless Kowloon Walled City to become a triad kingpin for the notorious Sun Yee On. Known as the Little Overlord, he was a human weapon who intimidated movie stars and crushed rivals without a second thought. This is the story of his brutal rise and his equally shocking fall from grace. For more incredible true crime stories, be sure to subscribe to our channel. In the sprawling, neon-soaked labyrinth of Hong Kong during the latter half of the 20th century, power was a currency as fluid as the water in Victoria Harbor. The city's underworld was a chaotic chessboard of shifting alliances and brutal turf wars. Gangsters, like fleeting heroes in an ancient epic, would rise in a blaze of glory only to be washed away by the next tide of violence. The Sun Yee, on the 14K the Wo Xing. Wo, these were not just names, but empires built on fear, fighting for control over every street corner, every gambling den, and every illicit enterprise. In this brutal ecosystem, a new kind of predator was about to emerge, a man forged not in strategy rooms, but in the blood and grime of back-alley brawls. His name was Thomas, and he would come to be known as the Little Overlord of Tsim Sha Tsui East. His story began in the darkest heart of the city, the infamous Kowloon Walled City. It was less a neighborhood and more a vertical slum, a lawless anomaly where sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy of makeshift buildings and tangled wires. Here, children grew up not with textbooks, but with the screams of arguments, the flash of razor blades, and the acrid smell of cheap cigarettes. Thomas, born to HaoVN, learned his first and most important lesson in these oppressive shadows: to survive, you had to fight. His father was a ghost, gone since he was a boy, and his mother worked tirelessly at a menial job. There was no one to protect him. Life was a daily struggle for a bowl of rice and the right to stand your ground among the other feral children. Thomas wasn't smart or charming. His only assets were large frame fists that felt like bricks and a stubborn, fearless grit. At 13, he broke his cousin's arm for stealing money from his mother. By 15, he was in a juvenile detention center after a knife fight between rival gangs of petty thieves. The walled city had been his crucible, burning away everything but his capacity for violence. At 18, Thomas officially stepped into the world of organized crime. He started at the bottom, a nobody running errands in a small gambling parlor in Tsim Sha Tsui East, a district glittering with wealth and opportunity. But he was not meant to be an errand boy. His blood ran too hot for a life of quiet servitude. Whenever trouble brewed, whenever a rival gang tried to muscle in, Thomas was the first to charge forward. He fought without thinking, without mercy. A knife, a pipe, a metal chair. Anything he could grab became a weapon. He would attack until his opponents were face down on the pavement, no longer moving. He didn't need backup or someone to watch his back. He was a one-man army. His name began to circulate in whispers after a particularly bloody confrontation in a dingy bar on a side street. That night, 4 enforcers from the rival 14K triad, all armed with machetes, came to send a message. Thomas was there alone. He didn't retreat or try to negotiate. As they advanced, he grabbed a beer bottle, smashed it on a tabletop, and met their charge head-on. The fight was a whirlwind of primal fury. He moved through their coordinated attack with a terrifying directness, ignoring the cuts and bruises to land devastating blows. He drove the jagged bottle into one man's shoulder, used a bar stool to shatter another's knee, and slammed a third's head into the wall until he crumpled. Blood splattered across the red tile floor. When it was over, Thomas stood panting, drenched in his own blood and that of his enemy, surrounded by 4 unconscious bodies. It was this raw, untamed display of power that changed his destiny. Watching from a corner table unseen amidst the chaos was a man named Kowloon Shun. Tu was a rising star within the Sun Yee. On a sharp, ambitious operator who understood that power wasn't just about numbers, but about having the right tools. In Thomas, he saw the perfect weapon, a loyal, fearless enforcer who could break through any obstacle. He saw a man who didn't fear death, who fought with a purity of violence that couldn't be taught. After the bar staff had nervously called for calm, Kowloon Shun approached Thomas. He didn't issue a command or a threat. He simply invited the bloodied brawler to join him for a drink. That invitation was a doorway. In that moment, Thomas ceased to be an anonymous street thug and stepped onto the grand stage of the Hong Kong underworld. He became Kowloon Shun's most trusted asset, his personal vanguard. Their partnership was brutally effective. Tu was the strategist, the cool-headed leader who planned their expansion. Thomas was the fist that executed those plans. In every clash for territory, every high-stakes confrontation, Thomas was at the front, a human battering ram who would charge headfirst into a sea of enemies to clear a path for his boss. He fought side by side with his leader through countless battles, his loyalty forged in the heat of shared combat. As Kowloon Shun's influence grew, so did Thomas's reputation. He was no longer just a fighter. He was a symbol of the Sun Yee On's might in the district. He started to gather his own crew of followers, men drawn to his fearsome aura. The name they gave him was a perfect reflection of his status, the little overlord of Tsim Sha Tsui East. He had clawed his way up from the gutters of the walled city to become a force to be reckoned with, a king in his own burgeoning, violent domain. The delicate balance of power within the Sun Yee On shattered overnight. The triads' supreme leader, its dragonhead, Hyung Hwa Yim, was arrested in a sweeping police crackdown. In the ensuing chaos, Thomas's own mentor, the calculating Kowloon Shun, was cast out of the organization for a failed power play. The command structure crumbled, leaving a gaping vacuum at the top. While others hesitated, unsure of their next move, Thomas saw his chance. He had never been a man for politics or grand strategy, but he understood the simple, brutal logic of force. He rallied his loyal crew, the men who had fought and bled alongside him, and made his move. With no one left to challenge him, he declared himself the new authority in Tsim Sha Tsui East, the acting fist of the fractured Sun Yee On, in its most profitable territory. Power, once tasted, became his new addiction, and it bloated his ego like a poison. The quiet, menacing enforcer was gone, replaced by an arrogant king who ruled his domain with an iron whim. He grew loud and boastful, and a strange specific prejudice took root in his mind. He developed a visceral hatred for men he deemed short and fat, seeing them as offensive caricatures. He would often rant to his underlings about his disgust, and two names came up more than any others: the prolific film director Wang Jing and the beloved round-faced comedian Eric Tsang. To Thomas, their success was an insult, and he made no secret of his contempt. The world of Hong Kong's elite was small and incestuous, a glittering fishbowl where movie stars and gangsters often swam in the same waters. One night, at a lavish birthday party for a famous singer, Eric Tsang, fueled by alcohol and arrogance, made a catastrophic mistake. In front of a crowd of industry power players, he loudly and crudely insulted Albert Jung, the formidable head of the Emperor Entertainment Group and a man with deep, powerful connections. Jung was humiliated but held his tongue. The matter was seemingly smoothed over with a public apology, but the insult lingered. Not long after, Tsang, emboldened and apparently having learned nothing, went on a television program and publicly mocked the physical appearance of Joey Jung, a rising pop star who was Albert Jung's prized protégé. This was no longer a drunken slip, it was a public declaration of disrespect. This time, there would be no apology. Albert Jung decided a lesson needed to be taught, one that would be understood by everyone in their circle. A call was made, and the request filtered down through the shadowy channels of the Sun Yee On. The job of delivering the message landed squarely with the man who controlled the streets, Thomas. It was the perfect assignment for him, a convergence of professional duty and personal prejudice. Weeks later, Eric Tsang was leaving a popular nightclub with a group of friends, laughing and carefree. As he stepped onto the pavement, the night erupted. 7 or 8 men, their faces hidden by masks, swarmed out of the darkness, wielding wooden clubs. They moved with terrifying efficiency, ignoring everyone else and focusing solely on the actor. The attack was swift and brutal. Tsang was beaten to the ground before he could even register what was happening. The masked figures laid into him with a cold, impersonal fury, the sickening thud of wood on bone echoing in the street. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished, leaving Tsang bleeding and broken on the sidewalk. His friends and the bystanders were frozen in shock. The attack had been a message, and the signature was unmistakable. Eric Tsang's mouth had earned him a trip to the hospital and 29 stitches across his scalp. The little Overlord had delivered his sermon. With his reputation now reaching mythical proportions, Thomas found that he rarely had to resort to actual violence anymore. Fear did the work for him. One evening, he swaggered into the restaurant of the Shangri-La Hotel with a few of his men. Across the dining room, he spotted director Wang Jing eating with friends. Thomas walked calmly over to their table. He didn't say a word about his public disdain. Instead, he simply placed a heavy hand on Wang Jing's shoulder, leaned in, and gave him a wide, chilling smile. "Fancy seeing you here," he said, his voice deceptively casual. Then he walked away and took a seat at a nearby table, his eyes fixed on the director. Wang Jing froze the chopsticks halfway to his mouth. He looked over and saw Thomas staring at him, a look of pure mockery on his face. The director's mind raced. He remembered all the stories, Thomas's open declarations of hatred for him, and the fresh, brutal news of what had happened to Eric Tsang. He understood instantly that he was in mortal danger. There was no thought of finishing his meal or making a scene. He silently put down his chopsticks, motioned to his friends, and without a word, got up and walked out of the restaurant, leaving a full table of food behind. Thomas watched him go, a smirk playing on his lips. He hadn't needed to throw a single punch. His very presence was now a weapon, a suffocating aura of menace that could clear a room. He was at the absolute peak of his power, the undisputed, feared, and arrogant king of his concrete kingdom. The world that had made Thomas was beginning to disappear. The freewheeling, violent days of the 80s and 90s were fading into memory as Hong Kong's handover to China approached. The rules were changing. The triads, sensing the shift, began to evolve. They laundered their images, along with their money, moving from open street warfare to the subtle complexities of legitimate business shell corporations and stock market manipulation. The new generation of gangsters wore suits and carried briefcases, not meat cleavers. Violence became a last resort, a surgical tool used quietly in the shadows, not a public spectacle. In this new world, Thomas was an analog relic in a digital age. His only skill, raw physical dominance, was now a clumsy liability. The Sun Yee On leadership. The men who had replaced his old mentor saw him as a problem. They tried to reason with him to offer him a way to adapt, perhaps running security for a nightclub or a parking garage. But Thomas, his mind clouded by arrogance and nostalgia, refused to listen. He saw it as an insult. He was the little Overlord, not some glorified doorman. One by one, his revenue streams were cut off his territories, reassigned to more sophisticated operators. The organization that he had bled for simply left him behind, and his empire dwindled until he was left with nothing but a handful of aging followers and his bitter memories. His final pathetic chapter played out on a humid night in the early 2010s in the crowded, noisy bar district of Lan Kwai Fong. Thomas was no longer the imposing figure of his prime. He was heavier now, his face puffy and flushed with alcohol, his eyes holding a permanent, resentful glare. He was a ghost, haunting his old hunting grounds, drinking away the afternoon and into the night, a relic telling stories no one wanted to hear. Drunk and belligerent, he began to loudly berate a group of young men at a nearby table. They were young, cocky, and full of the swagger that Thomas himself once possessed. They were members of the Wo Shing Wo, a rival triad that now held significant power in the city. They looked at the pathetic old man and laughed. "Do you know who I am?" Thomas slurred his voice thick with rage and self-pity. "I used to run Tsim Sha Tsui. They called me the little Overlord. I made men like you piss their pants." The young gangsters just smirked. To them, he wasn't a legend, he was a joke, a washed-up drunk living in the past. One of them shot back a dismissive insult, and that was all it took. Whatever was left of Thomas's famous temper erupted. He lunged forward, his movements slow and clumsy. The ensuing fight was a grotesque parody of his former glory. There was no tactical brilliance, no overwhelming force. He was just an old drunk man swinging wildly. The young Wo Shing Wo members descended on him like a pack of wolves. They easily dodged his telegraphed punches and overwhelmed him with their speed and numbers. A chair crashed over his back, sending him stumbling to his knees. Boots rained down on his ribs and head. He collapsed to the floor, the world spinning into a painful, hazy blur. The once feared king of the streets was being kicked and stomped like a dog, the floor around him turning slick with his own blood. He would have died there, a pathetic end note to a violent life if not for a stroke of pure chance. Two senior Sun Yee On members, genuine high-ranking figures known as tigers within the triad, happened to be passing by. Hearing of the commotion, they stepped inside. The atmosphere in the bar shifted instantly. These were men who still commanded absolute respect. They didn't have to draw a weapon or even raise their voices. Their mere presence was a silent command. One of them looked at the young Wo Shing Wo leader and gave a slight shake of his head. The message was clear. "Stop. This is finished." Out of deference to their rank, the young gangsters immediately backed away, leaving Thomas a crumpled, bloody heap on the floor. They had proven their point. They gently helped their fallen comrade to his feet, his face a mask of blood, his white shirt stained crimson. He was barely conscious as they half-carried him out into the night and toward a hospital. The little Overlord had to be saved from common street thugs. The humiliation was absolute. It was the final, crushing testament to his fall. His life had been a monument to the idea that might makes right, but he had failed to understand that the nature of might is always changing. He was a man built for a specific kind of war, and when that war ended, he was left with no purpose. A weapon left to rust in the rain, ultimately broken not by a legendary rival, but by time itself. Ultimately, the story of the little Overlord is a brutal lesson. Written in blood on the streets of Hong Kong, power, built on brawn alone, is destined to crumble. He was a king in an era of open warfare, but when the world changed, he was left behind a relic of a bygone age. His spectacular downfall wasn't just a gangland defeat. It was a clash with time itself, a battle he could never win. The reign of the fearsome street king ended not with a bang, but a pathetic whimper. To uncover more forgotten legends from the criminal underworld, hit that subscribe button.